Hey, what's up? So we're continuing with the King's Gambit, and slowly but surely we're getting closer to the main lines and approaches by black. Today, I'm about to show you the second move, d6 by black, fourth common move by the number of games in the database by black. Pretty good and easy game for white, and usually it's chosen by those who don't want to go in a long theoretical battles and who just want to play more or less or just come out of the opening with more or less normal position and to, I don't know, have like kind of a playable type of the game. But here, that's why I'm here, to give you like specific reactions on those moves and to get the relatively easy positions with the white pieces if that happens. So let's get started. After they go with d6, you just go with knight f3. I very much like knight f3 move because it's a nice developing move. You care about the center, and more importantly, you just force them to either take on f4, which is going to lead us into the main positions of the e takes f4 second move, and I'm not going to cover this line today. I'm not going to cover it in this video. I'm going to do it in some other a lecture and some other video where it's going to be a part of one of the main continuations by black. So by the way, you just go here with d4 if that happens, and if they go and try to defend it with g5, I'm gonna cover in one of those videos two main approaches. One is going to be a classic one, h4, breaking these pawns and weakening the pawn on f4, and when they play g4, this a little bit surprising knight g1, but basically here you just go after the weak pawn on f4. Although nowadays, according to the engines, black just wants to defend the pawn on f4, and there are like difficulties on both sides. Another line that is likely more in a spirit of the King's Gambit will be knight c3, where you just develop both of your knights, you control the center, control the d5 square, but from another point of view, they just go with g4, and just like in Muzio Gambit, where the knight on f3 is hanging, you will go and take the pawn on f3, and when they take, you will take by queen. I very much like this type of position, this continuation, and just like I told you, this is more in the spirit of a typical King's Gambit. You sack a piece for initiative, for a good activity of your pieces, and for fast development of white pieces. But once again, I won't cover any of these lines today. I'm just saying, in case they take on f4, it transposes into those lines, and you're going to be able to check them in some of the future videos. Slowly but surely, we're completing this King's Gambit survey. After knight f3, the main line is knight c6, but that is not the subject of this one. I'm going to show you here bishop g4. I usually explain my students, if somebody attacks your pawn, try to avoid defending the pawn by pinning with your bishop. Because simply, what do we play? We just play h3, and that's important to remember here. That's a nice move, very solid move, and you immediately get a very easy advantage. So when they take, and they have to, you just take by queen. And you already have a bishop pair, and all you have to remember in these positions is that you somehow have to complete your development and rely on the bishop pair for the rest of the game. So it's a very simple game, although it requires certain amount of knowledge what to do and what should be the plan afterwards. There are like a couple of rules. First of all, any f takes e5 at some point, isolating the pawn on e5 and opening f file is a good thing for you. Second thing, any knight c6 at any point should be met by bishop b5, whether they do it now or later. And now you would say, but Maya, you just mentioned the bishop pair, and now any knight c6 we pinned by bishop b5, and you said don't go with the bishop. But here there is a reason for that. Here we recaptured by queen on f3 and kept a healthy pawn structure, and we definitely have the bishop pair, but we're always ready to give up the bishop pair if it leads to a broken pawn structure. So when they play knight c6, we play bishop b5, take on c6, and we're going to create double pawns. Also, bishop b5 sometimes accelerates our development and actually slows down their development, which helps you in terms of getting an easier game. And there is another rule. how to complete development with the rest of your pieces. Most likely, knight c6 will be played, and you will play bishop b5, and you will have to go with knight c3, d3, and short castle. That's how you play those positions. Very simple chess, very simple game. And now my job will be to show you like 2 or 3 games, and then you just play a decent chess afterwards. So let's say they go with knight f6. You can't play bishop b5 because the knight is not on c6. On knight f6, they just want a complete development with, for example, bishop e7 and short castle. But do you care about that? Absolutely not. So you play knight c3 developing move. They go knight c6. And anytime you see knight c6, it's a very nice moment for what? For bishop b5 to pin the knight, to threaten afterwards, especially if they play a6 and lose tempo, but more importantly, to go with castle, to clear out the back rank for your castle so you can complete your development in the most specific, easy way, and you just have a nice game. When you go with bishop b5, they go bishop e7. You go castle, they go castle. Now they threaten knight e4. Watch out not to blunder this one. So it's time to give it up. We usually don't give up unless they play a6, but in this case they were threatening knight e4. We gotta take, and now we play f takes e5. I'd like to evaluate and actually to emphasize an importance of broken pawn structure. I even put yellow color on the e5 pawn. Weak pawns are a7, c7, c6. Possibly weak pawn is e5. But I have to tell you one more thing. This reminds me very much on my course, Bishop's Opening, that I made on Chessable a few months ago. Let me just sell my product and advertise it a little bit. If you want to find it now, it's on the sale on Chessable, so feel free to get it. And in those positions, you have an open F file for your activities on the king side, but you also have extremely solid queen side pawn structure. So what do we do here? We play d3, rook b8, and I have a novelty here for you. I've seen so many games being played in a similar fashion. Actually, this was a critical position in too many games, but nobody played the following move. And the following move is my novelty. And actually, it's a part of the plan, guys. It's a part of the plan, and it's a part of the easy strategic concept by White, how you can actually afterwards punish them for playing with a broken pawn structure. Knight d1, and this knight either goes on e3 and f5 into the attack. Your king is gonna go and move from some bishop c5 checks or queen d4 checks, and also there's a possibility that sometimes your knight may go on c4 and go after the possibly weak pawn on e5. But more importantly, your knight goes on e3, your king goes on h2, and you're just looking and eyeing at some knight f5, launching the attack on the king side. After bishop g4, h3, bishop f3, queen f3, knight c6, we have the main line, we have the biggest number of games played like this, and now what are you going to do? I already told you, any knight c6 should be met by bishop b5. If they go with anything like a6, you always take on e5, and I already explained you this. You always go with pretty much the same thing. For those, by the way, you threaten mate in 1. For those who give you check, thanks guys so much. Always gives us this check, because this actually puts our king into safety, and now we're just breathing easier. So when you play d3, your knight goes on d2, your bishop will go on g5, and that's how you go after the e5 pawn. You have an open f file, and you once again have a possibility of going with, for example, knight goes on c4, and then you go knight e3 and knight f5 at some point. If in case of bishop g5, bishop e7, they play bishop e7. That's a good thing, and that's a relatively easy game. After bishop b5, let's say they go with knight g on e7. They keep the flexible knights, and that's nice, and that's why I put a green color. But at the same time, I gotta put a red color on the knight on e7, especially because now the dark square bishop is blocked. And that's why I told you sometimes bishop b5 not necessarily is gonna give you bishop takes e6, but it's gonna give you it's going to accelerate your opening. So what do we play after knight g on e7? You just go with a simple move, short castle, threatening f takes e5, and they are already in a kind of difficulties. So they go like this. Okay, man, I mean, you can play like this, but I'm not gonna take, because after f takes e5 they will capture by knight and defend on f7. Even that one is possible, because afterwards we can play d4 and kick the knight away. But here I would be willing to go with bishop a4, b5, bishop b3, and I'm happy to go with a game like this, which scenario really resembles on some bishops opening ideas, and plan with an open f file with a relatively easy game. They take. I'm very happy. I have an open f file. You gotta possibly weak squares. I'm threatening f takes e5 to take on f7. You gotta do something. You're in much worse position, because any f6, I'm just gonna play d4. I'm just opening up the game. If you take, I can take by queen, and I have control of the light squares. You have potentially broken this one. I have an open a file. King is weak. Your light squares on this diagonal are weak, and I'm just so much better. If you ever capture like this, I can capture by my bishop, and I have a nice development advantage while you have lots of structural weaknesses. That's it about bishop g4, and I don't want to make more complicated philosophy than this variation deserves. And finally, if they go with knight c6, of course, there you go with the bishop b5. Bishop g4 now would transpose into the third move, bishop g4, so they gotta go bishop d7. We go d3. That's what I like about this system. So in like a couple of months, you don't need to remember any of these specific moves and variations. You just remember, if they go bishop g4, I go h3 to unpin myself. If they go knight c6, Maya told us to play bishop b5 to pin the knight on c6, and to have like a relatively easy development with castle d3 and knight c3. And what happens if they, for example, go with a6? Anytime they go, you always take, and all of a sudden they lose the pawn on e5, so they can't play e6. Anytime they now take on f4, thanks for giving me possibly strong center. Thanks for giving me possibly and you should never miss a chance to play d4. And now to hide your bishop here, in which case you gotta go with, for example, I've seen a couple of games bishop g4 threatening on d4, then you go bishop e3, they go knight b4, and then you keep these bishops. Then you, in next two moves, play a3 and h3, kicking both of these minor pieces away, and then repositioning your light square bishop back on d3, and going queen e1, queen g3, or playing g4. And this really is one of those positions that I covered in my course, Bishop's Opening, and it's relatively easy game for white. White has a nice development, slightly better game, and the rest should be very easy. Finally, if they go with knight f6, you just take on c6, you take here, and you take the pawn for free. That's a very easy plan, and that's a very easy trick, and you should never miss a chance to win that pawn. That's why they gotta either take on f4, or they simply have to play knight g on e7, getting a full flexibility. And here I just want to show you one game, nothing more than this, because any bishop c6 now can be opposed with knight takes c6, where they would just defend the pawn on e5. So what do? We play the most logical thing. They gotta go e takes f4, because simply now they have problems even with the f7 pawn, and I actually see this f7 pawn as a weakness. And this is where we need to check one game. They gotta take on f4. What happens if they go g6? You just take, and when they take by pawn, you have a very lovely knight g5 and bishop c4. All of a sudden, they have lots of weaknesses on the f7 and d6, basically light squares. If they take by knight, I take on e5, threatening on f7. They gotta take, boom. Once again, you have problems on the light squares. Once again, I bring my bishop back on c4, and it does its job. That's why I just want to show you one nice correspondence game between solid guys. E takes f4, bishop f4, And by the way, I once again want to remind you on one thing. I insist on correspondence games because, they're relatively good, and these guys uses engines, which means no serious mistakes. So after knight g6, bishop e3, bishop e7, knight c3, castles. And take a look at the plan by white in this game. He won this game in next 10 moves. What a lovely attack by white. So take a look at this. He plays knight e5, threatening to remove sooner or later the dark square bishop as a defensive piece. The guy plays knight b8. He says, okay, you want to exchange the bishops, in which case he's just going to take on d7 by knight. No, I'm not going to give you that pleasure. Let me just reposition and improve game of my bishop with the bishop c4. Bishop e6, he says, okay, buddy, but now I'll oppose your bishop with the bishop e6. Yes, but unlike most of e4 stuff, here I have a nice place for the knight on d4 that harasses this bishop, threatens to take, followed by some knight f4 or whatever, and at the same time my knight can even go on f5 in some positions. The guy brought it back to d7 and played knight f5. A lovely square for the knight. As we both know, any bishop f5, rook takes f5 would give us a very, very easy game on both. On the f file, against the f7 pawn, on the h file, and this with the bishop pair with such a powerful knight on d5 and bishop on c4 would be almost undefendable. So he goes knight c6, you go queen h5, bishop e6, and rook f3. Rook f3 gives you both rook a to f1 and gives you rook h3. What a lovely rook lifting, and also doubling your rooks and piling up on the f file. The guy goes with a rook e8 and get ready for a really smashing mating attack. Rook h3, threatening mate on h7. Knight goes on f8, looks like everything is so solid. Knight d on e7, only move is knight e7. Bishop e6, only move is f takes e6. Knight g7, bishop h6, and he can't stop queen f7, followed by queen g7 mate in the case of this. So you just go with the queen f7 and he can't stop that mate. Or in the case of king g8, you have so many options to mate him. You can take on f8, play rook f1. For example, I like bishop f8 taking there. I also believe that we can go with some rook to g3, knight g6, maybe he can defend himself, but I definitely think the easiest type of chess is this one, threatening mate. They gotta take like this, then you involve another piece into the action, and the mate is inevitable. So black resigned. Hopefully, you're just going to remember these main principles of playing against the second move d6, and for the next 3 videos that are about to come, we're just going to be able to see the most important things against the King's Gambit. And when we talk about these 3 most important things, we talk about bishop c5, d5, and e takes f4. So real things are about to come. Thanks for watching, and feel free to subscribe and donate sometimes as well. Bye bye, guys.